J'étais juste un peu trop intimidé pour lui dire que j'adore ce que vous faites.
Ah bon, c'est bien gentil. Bien, merci.
Et j'ai dit à Frédéric, hein, qu'en sortant de Martinpuy, vous m'avez emmené dans la pâture pour mesurer où était le char en sortant de Martinpuy.
C'était avec le même outil?
Ah oui, aussi.
Hein?
C'était avec le même outil?
Oui,
Oui, ok. On
oui.
y va.
Et gradué par mètre.
En mètre, ah oui, bien sûr.
Oui, parce que vous mesurez l'endroit.
2/3 more or less was under German control. 2/3 then. The 47th Division came here and they eventually took the wood with the aid more or less of tanks. On the day in question, the 15th of September, there were 4 tanks that were supposed to help the infantry here. They came up from Crucifix Corner, which is where most of the troops came up. That was the main entry point for all the men coming up to fight in High Wood. Many thousands of men eventually, over a month or so, came up here. In fact, a month and a half, from July the 14th to September the 15th, 2 months. Many hundreds, many thousands of men came up this way. Some of them didn't go back. Many casualties were caused here, and many men still lie buried under the ground where we're treading. So we must bear that in mind when we go ahead. Some were taken out, their bodies were found, identified or not identified, but many, many men are still here in the ground. Okay. The 4 tanks in question came up from Crucifix Corner near the Bazantin villages, to Bazantin-le-Grand, Bazantin-le-Petit. And the plan of attack was that they should enter the wood. That was a nonsense sort of order. It was laid down by Lieutenant General Pulteney, who was the Corps commander of the Third Corps, that the tank should come into the wood. There were no trees this size here when the battle took place. They're all shattered and lying all over the place. But although the trees weren't here, the trunks were on the ground, jagged stumps where the trunk had been torn off by the explosions. These are man-made, or man-caused, tank traps. And yet Pulteney said, go into the wood. Tanks go into the wood. The tank men argued against it, the infantry argued against it. Pulteney, in a show of ignorant arrogance, said, send them through the wood, I want the wood cleared. So they came into the wood. It was a disaster really, because the tanks quickly got bogged down and snagged on branches and tree stumps, and it was an enormous shame for the men who were fighting here, both for the tank men of course, but even more so for the infantry. What should have happened was the tank should have gone round the outside, or ready to go round the outside, and then plaster the whole wood with artillery, and then send the infantry in with the tanks around to assist. But that didn't happen. So we're going to have a look at the front line here, and then the no man's land, and German front line, and then we'll go into the topmost part of the wood where the Germans are still holding out. Nearer the edge of the wood, it came out of off the road there, along the inside of the wood, along here, and then suddenly turned out into the open. Now, why he did that, I don't know. I could only think that he imagined, in the torment of battle and confusion, the smoke and the dust and the dirt and all the terror of fighting, he thought he had got to the far edge of the wood. And indeed, when he got there, he turned into the open, thought he saw a trench, and he fired on it. It happened to be a British trench. And he got a roasting from the commanding officer, the battalion commander, and he also got an MC, which I've never understood. But it's definitely that action that he was mentioning. And now the other thing, apart from those two which fell foul of the shell holes and everything else here, we have another tank which was about over here, where that clearing is there, with a chap called Henderson in it. He was the only one of C Company. There were 2 companies, C and D. C Company, the only one of C Company who came in here. he went into the wood a very short distance, about 40 or 50 yards, and then turned over, turned onto a tree trunk or something, and his tank was stuck firm, and he didn't go any further. Now the only tank that did any good at all here started up from the end of this trench, and it was commanded by a chap called Samson, D13, and he called his tank inevitably Delilah. Every tank in D Company began with a D, its name began with a D, every tank in C Company began with a C. But I don't know the name of that C Company, but there was Delilah here, and he came from there right across the wood here and entered across this ride right over into about 2/3 of the way through the wood. And he did a lot of good, but it wasn't thanks to Pulteney, the Corps Commander, who wanted them to go through the wood trunks, tree trunks, snagged branches and everything else.
Trevor, c'est pas dans le bois qu'il y avait un soldat allemand qui essayait avec sa baïonnette, en
Oui,
passant par
yes.
la trappe des
That's
des
right.
douilles, de donner un coup de
This
baïonnette.
shows that the Germans were in fact very brave, indeed, because here, about the only place where, not the only place, but one of the few places where they showed extraordinary courage and got in on top of the tank, right upside against it. As Jean says, reminds me, the German got his bayonet into part of the tank. At the end, at the back of every door, there was a place for throwing out the empty shell cases, and he got a bayonet up there and hit one of the chaps in the leg.
Your book and I remember.
Yeah, really, you did very well. Right, so that tank went right up to the second German line in the wood. It didn't get up to the main objective. What was the main objective? Capital O, that is the main objective pause line. It got up to one of the target trenches. And the main trench itself was Switch Trench. Switch because it joined a main line with another main line, rather like a railway. It was the switch. That only just came into the northeastern corner of the wood. But this D13 got 2/3 of the way across the wood, and it was at least partially successful. Samson and Delilah, they did quite well on that day.
Delilah being a female tank equipped with machine guns.
Yes, it was actually, yes. Okay, so we're going to go up here. What I'd like you to do, Philip, is to tell us when we get to 58 metres. 58 metres, okay, up we go. On the 2, 6, 2, 3...
304.
2, 3, 4, 6, yeah, okay. I think we're on the Queen Stretch, go to 50 metres, another stretch of Queen Stretch, 70 time, okay.
On a dit
Across here,
des
and
bombes
this was fully
deuxième
manned by the Germans here, but the British came across here suffering enormous casualties. The Germans were well ensconced in behind the trees and in dugouts and behind the stumps of the trees, and it was a bloody battle where men were cut to pieces by each other and by hand grenades and shells falling down. It really was a most awful time, and it'd been an awful time for 2 months. This place saw as much of the worst fighting, much of that fighting, more than anywhere else I think on the Somme. It was really a terrible, terrible slaughterhouse. Doesn't look like it now, but it did then.
So these weren't prepared German positions, except
Sorry?
they weren't pre-prepared German positions. They've made these positions since the attack on the wood.
No,
Or
well,
was it
they
an
were not.
established line?
They were not done. They were not made, I think, before the 14th of July.
Right.
But came the 14th of July, when the British were just down the this ride. Then I think they did everything they could here to strengthen their defences, both in the trenches here and over there. And also, there's the odd dugout and I think concrete emplacement further over. Not many of those. They're quite happy to dig themselves down behind the tree trunks, behind the stumps, which gave them shelter from view and from the British bullets. But if you think the whole attack came over in roughly that angle, sweeping towards the northeast corner of the wood, you get some idea of what it was like. The I'll just find my place again now. What do I do with the map? It was the 15th London Rifles over there. Down here it was the 17th London Rifles, down in that direction, and beyond them the 18th, and beyond them the 19th. So it was a very full battlefield. Everybody fought extremely well, but no great advantage to either side until the British finally swept the Germans out. They were aided by a hurricane bombardment of mortars, when mortars were shot into the ground practically endless, in an endless stream from various trench mortar batteries on the British side, coming down here amongst the Germans. And that really finally got the Germans moving and got them out of High Wood. But it had been a most terrible struggle to get them out of here. The great tragedy is that the chance of capturing this wood was there for the asking on the 14th of July, 2 months before. And it was the muddle on the British side. It was, I think, a touch of vanity perhaps on the cavalry side, in that the cavalry were going to be given the chance of capturing High Wood. It took them ages to get here. They were many miles behind the front line where their base was. They then had to struggle through the broken ground of the whole Somme area, the battlefields of the previous weeks. And then they finally got here late. And by then, the thing was far too far gone. The victory, which was just there for us, vanished. Out of victory was snatched the, whatever it is.
Yes, as your victory, just defeat was snatched as the jaws of victory.
Right.
Yes.
Which is a most terrible tragedy. And part of that is due to, I think, two things certainly. The original decision on the 14th of July not to push the attack ahead, when that had been a brilliantly conceived plan and a brilliantly executed plan to bring the infantry into High Wood. There was the cavalry attack across the fields down below and all that sort of thing, but the main assault on the wood was going to be carried out by cavalry, and that was the main reason for failure. And the men who fought here for the next 2 months paid the price, a most terrible high price for that delay. We're going to go down here just to the end of the wood, just to show you. You may just see the remains of the switch line over in that area, but I'm not quite certain. It's a long time since I was here, several years since I was here, and the undergrowth is of course at its highest. But let's just go down to the end of the wood here.
Ok.
Yes, big at the air.
The area of Inchy, en Artois.
Ouais.
Ah ouais. C'était sur le bord de Natalus.
Toffee apple.
Et ça,
You've
c'est
seen these things
le plum
before,
pudding.
Philippe, have you?
This one, yes, but without the steel plate. And we were convinced it was the First World War things, but now it's clear that it's probably much more from the Second World War. And the plum pudding, of course.
It looks like
but
a practice
the plum
bomb
pudding
to me.
is full. It could be very dangerous. What Chamberdel said is that this could be a concrete bomb for training during World War II.
Yes. Yes.
You got that, okay.
I prefer to call it a pause line, where in fact the British, in their tactical plan, usually paused, regrouped, consolidated, cleared out the trenches of the occupants, and got themselves regrouped, and then carried on the battle. And this may have taken a sort of hour delay, something of that kind, while they regrouped and consolidated. And I've seen a German report which said, isn't it strange the way the British come up and then they just stop, then they start again. Whereas we, the Germans, roll on. Well, it may be they could organise it. After all, they had a very professional army. People fighting here were mainly volunteers. This is mid-1916. We didn't bring in conscription until early part of 1916. So a lot of the people fighting around here were volunteers. This was a territorial regiment, a territorial division, of course, 47th. But it may be that, well, all I'm saying is that the attack here was well carried out, It was extremely strongly contested by the Germans. They knew exactly what they were trying to hold on to. It was this communication between a bulk of the forces over there and the bulk of the forces in front of Flers. And the switch line, the capital O first objective, was a major target of the British. This was it here. And it was perhaps the worst bit to attack because it was in the middle of a wood, and the wood had every form of cover for the Germans. The thing that turned the tide was those mortar shells. So it's not a sorry tale, but it's certainly a tale of great heroism, enormous suffering, something I suppose of which we should all be proud in Britain, if only because it was so bravely fought by men. But I don't think we should be awfully proud of the thinking and the planning which brought us to this position. I think the generalship was wanting, certainly Pulteney's was. Okay, that's High Wood. It looks peaceful and pleasant, but it wasn't so many years ago.
Trevor's tank track's still in place.
In Albert, yeah.
On the 14th of July, and wait for the cavalry to come into action, and the cavalry came in too late. And that condemned us to 2 months of fighting here in the wood, in most terrible conditions. Pulteney, when he came here, when he was in charge of 3rd Corps here, said, right, we'll send 47th Division into the wood as part of the Battle of Flers-Courcelette, of which this was just one corps sector. It extended from Courcelette over there, right over to Comble. But this bit was one of the hardest pieces, and 47th Division had a very tough job. Not made easier by Pulteney's decision to send the tanks, which were supposed to help them, through the wood. One of them, as I say, started from this corner, had to go up inside the wood here, and then out the other end, and further over to a starfish redoubt and the cough drop redoubt on the far side. There were various objectives set for the tanks and for the infantry. Unfortunately, the tank that was here on this corner went up there inside the wood, lost its way, became completely disorientated as far as one can see, broke out of the wood into the lane on the other side, presumably thought he was on the far side of the wood, and found a trench and raked it with machine gun fire, but it happened to be British. He got a roasting from the battalion commander, and he also got an MC, which I find extraordinary. But there we are. That happened, and there's no doubt about it. According to the citation, he got it for action in High Wood. It doesn't say High Wood, but the action described is quite clearly this operation. It may not have been him. It may have been a machine gunner in the tank, getting a bit nervous and firing off at all these bodies that he saw around. But anyway, that was the... Now another tank also started from here and went up to the inside. Was Robinson, the founder was Robinson, one from here was a chap called Sharp, and he went up probably not much further than that house. The house was not original, not here in 1916, but his tank only got as far at the other side of that house and then fell into a shell hole. This place was riddled with shell holes. Every step of the way had a tank trap, virtually. Either a jagged tree stump or a fallen tree or a shell hole. Totally unsuitable for tanks, despite what Pulteney thought. 2 other tanks fought further over, and we're going to have a look at those now. 2 tanks.
This is 50 Division, yes?
50th Division,
50th
belonging
Division.
to Stones and Colley. They came up this track, leading from the Bazentin crossroads, the crossroads between Bazentin-le-Petit and Bazentin-le-Grand, and they came up this track, which is now the track beside the Bazentin-le-Petit cemetery, and I think because there's a brigade headquarters, and the brigade headquarters in the trees beyond the copse there, in a quarry, it looks it is a deep quarry, despite all the trees growing out of it. They hide the fact that it is very deep and good shelter for the staff around the brigadier. And I think the brigadier must have come out of that dugout and his headquarters to wish good luck to the 2 tanks of 50th Division coming up this same track, which is now in front of us and very much overgrown, between the cornfield on the right and the I think the beat on the left, and up through. It's overgrown now, totally overgrown and impassable to vehicles, but it comes out at the top by the road between Bazantin-le-Petit and the top of High Wood, and then goes over towards Martinpuy. But they stopped short of Martinpuy and went into a valley just this side of the village, and then they assaulted towards the northeast. Stones got bogged down fairly early on. His tank was then hit by artillery. Colley went on and did well and went right up alongside the village of Martinpuy, did a lot of damage to the Germans there, and then came back. I think they both survived the action, but certainly Colley did. He went into the Second World War, and it was to some extent, apart from Stone's unfortunate setback, it was a very successful operation as far as Colley was concerned, because the men were able to get around inside Martinpuy and the village eventually fell. So that is the 2 tanks with 50 Division here on the Somme, 15th of September 1916.
Tu veux disparaître?